We are in conversation with various political analysts about just these 2021 local government elections and what voting means for you. And if you do vote for a political party, what does it mean when they go into a coalition? Well, Levy, let's continue with our conversation. We spoke a little bit earlier with Professor Booysen, just giving us her version of what it would mean if these various political parties go into coalitions. Of course, coalitions aren't something new for South Africa. We've seen them being introduced in previous elections. But just from a framework, what would make a good coalition work in South Africa?
That as long as you don't have an outright voter, outright winner, you're actually going to have a coalition because it's imposed on us by the voter. But I think it's important for South Africans to develop a framework that will be able to determine how the players in a coalition are supposed to behave and how they are going to make sure that the coalition is strong and it exists during the era of that administration. And I think one other area that has to be looked at very seriously is that when coalitions are being formed, there has to be an element of openness, transparency, and accountability. Because what we've observed in South Africa now is that just after the elections, political party leaders go and lock themselves behind closed doors, and then they take decisions on behalf of the voters. And it leaves a lot of voters not knowing what is happening. They don't know who is in charge. And all they hear are fights and conflicts that are happening within the coalition government. So if it is regulated as proposed as well by General Bantu Holomisa or legislated, we'll then be able to have somewhere to stand on, to say we need to develop the do's and the don'ts in a coalition so that everybody else will then be able to know what is happening. But more importantly, I think it's important for voters to know what is happening with their vote. Because when you take a vote, and then you go then and enter into a relationship with your opponent, with not having informed your voter, that also for me becomes problematic on the voters themselves.
Professor Booysen, multi-party approaches are not a unique to South Africa. We've seen them across various other markets across the globe. But it's also a necessary thing for South Africa. We're told that it's probably the new reality. How would it work? Just taking into consideration what Levy is talking about this framework that should be legislated. How would it work in this country where you have honest leaders, transparent leaders, and then obviously that translates into service delivery?
Yes, it is indeed a difficult area of operation because we know what the rules are and we know coalition agreement really works and agreement on principles and policies programs really work, and we know there has to be accountability. But yet we run into this brick wall of party politics and political parties. How does one go in and prescribe to political parties, this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do? That is a whole new field. But that in one way could be a contribution that this election could be making if indeed the turnout, as indicated by IEC figures, is really going to be low, because that is going to be a serious message about the credibility for local government, including coalition governments. And that can be a wake-up call to tell people, the governments, these institutions, the bureaucrats, the politicians, there has to be a different way of doing. Otherwise, you're going to crush this multi-party democracy in South Africa.
Now, question to you both. Of course, very difficult, these elections, to project in terms of who are the strong winners that are going to come out of these elections. But some of the political parties have indicated that they would like to go into a coalition with certain parties and not so much with certain parties. The DA, for instance, wants to keep Cape Town free of coalitions and don't want to revert back to that 2006, scenario that you've indicated, Prof.
Yes.
But perhaps let's start with you, Prof. Who do you think which coalitions do you think we'll start seeing? I mean, we're sitting in Tshwane right now where we know that, it didn't work.
Exactly.
2016.
No, probably the most certain thing is that political parties have interim positions, have campaign positions. So they say they want to win, no need for any coalition, because they need to appear strong in the eyes of the voters to get the maximum result in elections. But we also know then that language ends, and the never that they'd use, they would never form a coalition with XYZ party, is never going to be never. And that is going to be very flexible, and they're going to do a straightforward, simple mathematical calculation, like in how can I add up my number of councillors to get a 50% plus one majority in councils. And the deals that have been forming and are likely to be formed again in this game are spectacular. And that's where exactly Levy's point about accountability is so pivotal, where we see in research that accountability is non-existent, and they do not want to inform their voters, and the whole political party is in the dark, and all kinds of deals happen for control about portfolios in municipalities, for access to municipal chains and speaker positions. The sky is the limit as to the deals that are made in that game.
Levy, I see you nodding to what the professor is saying, but maybe added to that, should coalitions, form as we've seen in the past, how do voters hold these leaders accountable, or public servants, if I can call them, accountable in a coalition?
Well, I think that is where the problem lies at this stage. Because when the political parties would enter into a coalition, they don't consult with the citizens on the ground. Hence, citizens will then end up frustrated, and they actually don't know who is in charge. Remember that in coalitions, when good things happen, all political parties in a coalition will love to take credits. But when things go wrong, some political parties will also not want to be responsible for the wrongs that are happening. And that indeed creates problems for ordinary citizens. But I think it's also important to refer to the founding provisions of our Constitution that talks about transparency, openness, accountability, and ensuring that all things are done openly. Why now would we have the same political parties that are in government not wanting to do things openly when we talk of coalitions? And I think that is where citizens must start to ask questions from political parties, or that what is your responsibility in our coalition? What is it that we are doing good for ordinary citizens in a coalition? Where do we go when we get frustrated? Because citizens are frustrated, and in the main, coalitions that are dominated by conflict and instability compromises service delivery, and that is at the heart of local government.
Just in closure, Prof. Booysen, I mean, one of the things that has always been said is that, the decision lies within the voter. A lot of the time we've seen voters being blamed for putting certain people in power and in leadership. But now that needle seems to be pointing towards the leadership and saying, actually, the onus is up to those that are elected to start rising. The ball is now on their court. And we said earlier that these leaders are starting to see that.
Yes.
So, just talking about the kind of leadership deficit that we are seeing in some of our political parties.
It has really been such a huge problem, where political parties have just not been reaching out and connecting with the voters the way they've done in the last 6 weeks. That kind of intense hyper-democracy is supposed to be there all of the time, but leaders think it's a 5-year mandate, and then they can sit back and neglect or do their inter-party deals and really come back and think they're forever going to be pardoned. There's going to be another final chance, but that is probably not happening.
Very concerning indeed. Well, thank you to you both. I really do appreciate your time, and thank you so much for giving us this analysis. Of course, we'll be in conversation throughout the week about just some of these developments that we are seeing on the ground.